The third Pax Beta hadn't even let her finish speaking before he slammed the gate in her face. Nadia Thornwood stood in the falling snow, her thin cloak plastered to her shoulders, and watched the torchlight disappear behind the iron bars. Her breath came in shallow gasps that misted and vanished. 7 months pregnant, she pressed her palm against the swell of her belly and felt her child shift. A small, persistent movement that reminded her why she couldn't simply lie down in the snowbank and let the cold take her. Please, she'd said to the beta, her voice cracked from disuse and dehydration. I only need shelter for one night. I can work. I can. We've heard about you. His lip had curled, disgust twisting features that might have been handsome under different circumstances. The Thornwood Omega who spread her legs for a mated alpha. You think we'd let a whore like you contaminate our pack? Take your bastard and find somewhere else to die. The words shouldn't have hurt anymore. She'd heard variations of them at 2 other pack boarders over the past week. But something in her chest, some stubborn flame that refused to extinguish, flickered with rage rather than despair. Lies, she thought, her frozen fingers curling into fists. Every word of it, lies. Her mate, Caden, had been unmated when they bonded. He'd been a warrior of good standing, a wolf who laughed easily and held her like she was precious. The rogues had torn him apart 3 moons ago, while she screamed from behind the barrier he'd thrown up to protect her. She'd felt his death through their bond, felt it sever like a blade through her soul, and had barely survived the breaking. The child she carried was his, their child. Conceived in love, in a proper mating, in everything that should have been sacred. But Theron had made sure no one would believe that. Her brother's face swam in her memory, those cold gray eyes, so like their father's, watching her with calculation as the pack's healer confirmed her pregnancy. She'd thought he might finally show her some kindness. Their parents were dead. Caden was dead. She had no one left but him. Instead, he'd smiled. This is perfect, he'd said, and she hadn't understood the meaning behind his words until 3 days later, when she woke to find guards dragging her from her bed to face accusations of adultery before the pack council. Nadia forced her legs to move, one step and then another through the deepening snow. The wind cut through her cloak like it wasn't there. Her feet had gone numb hours ago, which she supposed was a mercy. She couldn't feel the blisters anymore. Keep walking, she told herself. Keep walking or you're dead. The truth was simple, and it was damning. Not to her, but to Theron. She'd seen things she wasn't meant to see. Correspondence sealed with unfamiliar sigils, a meeting with hooded figures who smelled wrong, who smelled like rogues and blood, and something darker. She'd stumbled upon her brother's study 3 weeks before Caden died, and she'd read enough of the coded letters to understand that Theron Ironhold was selling pack secrets to their enemies. He knew she'd seen. He knew she could expose him. And so he'd spun his lies, painted her as a disgraced Omega who'd cuckolded a dead man, and driven her out before she could speak a word of the truth. The scars on her back, 4 parallel lines from his claws, earned when she'd tried to confront him, throbbed with every step. I will not die, begging in the snow. The thought crystallized in her mind with sudden clarity. She was Nadia Thornwood. Her mate had died protecting her. Her child deserved to live, and somewhere out there, someone would listen. The Alpha King. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had. Zephyr Stoneheart ruled the kingdom's largest territory from his mountain fortress, a wolf of such power that other alphas bent the knee rather than face his wrath. They called him ruthless. They called him cold. They said he'd killed 3 challengers in a single moon and displayed their pelts in his great hall. But they also said he was it was a 2-day walk to his borders, maybe 3, given her condition. Nadia looked down at her belly, at the small life depending on her to survive, and felt something shift in her chest. Not her wolf. That part of her had gone silent since Caden died, dormant and grieving in a way she couldn't reach. No, this was something else. This was her own stubborn human heart refusing to give up. "We're going to the Alpha King," she murmured to her child, "and I'm going to demand justice." The wind howled its answer, but Nadia was already walking. 2 days bled into 3. She lost time somewhere in the mountains, where the paths grew treacherous and the snow fell thick enough to blind her. She ate pine bark and drank melted snow. She sheltered in a shallow cave on the second night, curling around her belly while her body shook with cold she couldn't feel anymore. On the third morning, she emerged to find the fortress. It rose from the mountainside like something carved by gods rather than wolves. Black stone walls that seemed to drink the weak winter sunlight, towers that pierced the heavy clouds, gates of iron and oak that stood taller than any she'd ever seen. Banners snapped in the wind, bearing the Stoneheart sigil, a wolf's head wreathed in lightning. Nadia swayed on her feet. Her vision had started going gray at the edges sometime during the night, and she knew with clinical detachment that she was dying. Starvation. Exposure. Her body had reached its limits, and now it was beginning to shut down. Not yet, she thought fiercely. Not until I've said my piece. The guards at the gate saw her coming. She watched them exchange glances, saw the judgment in their postures, the way one of them wrinkled his nose at her ragged appearance. "Halt!" the larger one commanded when she was still 10 paces away. "State your business." Nadia drew herself up to her full height, which wasn't much, and met his eyes. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected, rough but clear. "I am Nadia Thornwood, former Omega of the Ironhold Pack. I seek an audience with the Alpha King to petition for sanctuary and to testify about treason committed against the crown." The guards exchanged another look. "Thornwood," the smaller one said slowly, "we've had ravens about you. Something about—" "Lies," Nadia cut him off. "Every word you've heard is a lie told by a traitor to cover his crimes. I have proof. I demand to present it to the king." A long moment passed. The wind screamed between the mountain peaks. Then the larger guard nodded slowly. "You've got spine, Omega. I'll give you that." He turned to his companion. "Fetch the steward. Tell him we've got a petitioner who walked here through a blizzard and still has the nerve to make demands." Nadia didn't let herself feel relief. Not yet. The gates opened. They brought her inside, through corridors of black stone that should have felt oppressive but somehow didn't. Fires burned in iron braziers along the walls, and the warmth hit her frozen skin like a physical blow. She stumbled, and one of the guards caught her elbow. Not roughly, not with contempt, just matter-of-fact steadiness. "The king's study is this way," he said. "Try not to pass out before you get there. He hates it when petitioners collapse on his floors." Nadia might have laughed if she'd had the strength. The doors to the study were carved oak, dark with age and polished to a gleam. The guard knocked twice, and a voice from within, deep, resonant, carrying an authority that seemed to vibrate in her bones, called, "Enter." The doors swung open. The study was large and cluttered with books, maps spread across every surface, candles burning in iron holders. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, and behind it sat the Alpha King. Nadia had expected a monster. The stories had painted him as something barely human, a creature of violence and cold calculation, more beast than man. What she found was a wolf in his prime, perhaps 30 winters old, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway and dark hair that fell past his jaw. His face was hard-planed and severe, a scar cutting through one dark eyebrow, but his eyes met hers, and the world stopped. Warmth flooded her veins like molten honey, sudden and overwhelming. Her wolf, dormant for 3 moons, silent since the bond breaking that had nearly killed her, surged against her skin with a force that made her gasp aloud. Heat pulsed in her chest, spread down her arms, coiled low in her belly. Every nerve in her body came alive at once, singing with a recognition that defied everything she knew. Mate, her wolf howled. Mate, mate, mate. Across the room, Zephyr Stoneheart's pen clattered to the desk. He rose slowly, his massive frame taut with something that looked like restraint barely held, and she watched gold bleed into his dark irises as his nostrils flared. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not threatening, but hungry. Unthinkable, he breathed. Nadia's hand flew to her swollen belly, her dead mate's child, the proof of a bond that had already been and broken, and she felt the impossible truth settle into her bones. Fate had bound her to the most powerful wolf alive. Her mind rejected it even as the bond pulled her toward him like gravity. The silence stretched between them, thick and impossible to break. Nadia's heart pounded against her ribs, each beat sending another wave of that inexplicable warmth through her exhausted body. Her wolf who had been silent, dormant, dead inside her since Caden's last breath rattled through their bond, pressed forward with a desperation that made her knees threaten to buckle. Zephyr Stoneheart stood frozen behind his desk, his knuckles white where they gripped the oak edge. The gold in his eyes hadn't faded. If anything, it burned brighter, amber bleeding through the dark until there was almost no brown left at all. His chest rose and fell with careful, measured breaths, as if he was fighting to control something primal that wanted very badly to be unleashed. "You need to sit down," he said, his voice rough. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a command, not really. It was something closer to a plea wrapped in authority, and Nadia found herself moving toward the chair nearest the fire before her mind caught up with her body. "What is happening to me?" She sank into the worn leather, her legs giving out more than sitting, and pressed both hands against her belly as if the physical reminder of her child could anchor her to reality. The baby kicked, a sharp jab beneath her palm, and she focused on that sensation with everything she had. Caden's child. Her mate's child. The mate she had mourned for 3 moons, whose death had carved a hollow in her chest that she'd been certain would never fill. And now this. Zephyr moved around the desk with the predatory grace of a wolf who had forgotten how to be anything else. He didn't approach her directly. Instead, he circled to the sideboard, pouring water from a stone pitcher into a cup. His hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. "How long since you've eaten?" he asked without turning around. "I don't..." Her voice cracked. She tried again. 2 days, maybe 3. There was pine bark. A muscle in his jaw ticked. He crossed the room and knelt before her chair, and the sight of the Alpha King on his knees made something in her chest clench with confusion. He held out the cup, waiting until she took it before he spoke again. "Drink. Slowly." The water was cool and clean, and it burned going down her ravaged throat. Nadia made herself take small sips, acutely aware of his proximity. This close, she could smell him. Pine and wood smoke and something darker. Something that made her wolf pace restlessly beneath her skin. Heat radiated from his body despite the distance he maintained, and she had to fight the irrational urge to lean into it. "You walked here," he said quietly. "Through the mountain pass. In a blizzard. I had nowhere else to go." His eyes searched her face and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. This was the wolf who had killed 3 challengers in a single moon. This was the king whose name made other alphas lower their eyes. But when he looked at her, something in his expression cracked open, revealing a vulnerability she never could have anticipated. "The bond," he said. "You feel it." It wasn't a question. "I feel it." The admission tore out of her like a confession. "But it's wrong. It has to be wrong. My mate died 3 moons ago. The bond breaking nearly killed me. My wolf hasn't stirred since his last breath, and now. Her voice broke. She pressed her fingers against her eyes, refusing to cry in front of this stranger who fate had apparently decided should own a piece of her soul. Zephyr didn't touch her. He stayed kneeling, close enough that she could feel the warmth bleeding from his skin, but he kept his hands at his sides with visible effort. "I've heard stories about this," he said slowly. "When a wolf loses their mate and survives, sometimes fate grants another chance. The first bond doesn't disappear. It scars over. But the heart can bear another mark." "I don't want another mark." The words came out fiercer than she intended. "I want my mate back. I want my pack back. I want my brother's lies exposed and justice for the wolves he sold to rogues." She met his golden eyes, refusing to flinch. "I didn't come here looking for a new bond. I came here to petition for sanctuary and give testimony about treason." Something flickered across his face. Respect, she thought, though it was hard to read his severe features. "Then that's what you'll do." He rose smoothly to his feet, putting distance between them that felt both necessary and wrong. "But you'll eat first, and sleep, and see my healers." "I can't. You can barely stand." His voice hardened, the alpha command threading through it. "Whatever you have to say will keep until you're not on the verge of collapse. I won't have it said that the Alpha King let a pregnant Omega die of exhaustion before she could speak her piece." Nadia wanted to argue. 3 packs had turned her away. 3 packs had looked at her swollen belly and her ragged clothes and decided she wasn't worth the trouble. She had no reason to trust that this would be any different, no matter what the bond whispered in her blood. But her body had reached its limits. The warmth of the fire was seeping into her frozen bones, and the water sat heavy in her empty stomach, and the chair beneath her felt like the softest bed she'd ever known. "One night," she said. "I'll tell you everything tomorrow." Zephyr nodded once. He moved to the door and spoke quietly to someone in the hall, and then he returned to stand by the fire, his back to her, giving her space that cost him something she didn't fully understand. "The steward will show you to a room," he said. "There will be food waiting. Eat what you can. The healers will check on you within the hour." He paused, his voice dropping. "You're safe here, Nadia Thornwood. Whatever else happens, whatever this bond means or doesn't mean, you're safe." She didn't believe him. She couldn't afford to. But her wolf settled slightly at his words, and she didn't have the strength left to fight it. The room they gave her was warm. That was the first thing Nadia noticed. The fire already crackling in the hearth. The heavy furs piled on the bed. The absence of drafts despite the mountain wind howling outside. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, waiting for the trap to reveal itself. It didn't. A tray sat on the small table by the window. Bread, cheese, dried meat, a bowl of something that steamed and smelled like herbs and chicken. Her stomach cramped painfully at the sight, reminding her just how close to starvation she truly was. She ate slowly, forcing herself to take small bites, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything in sight. The healers came and went, 2 soft-spoken women who examined her with gentle hands and clucked over her blisters and her dehydration and the thinness of her arms. They gave her something to drink that tasted of honey and chamomile and told her the baby was strong, healthy, determined to survive despite everything. "Like her mother," one of them murmured, and Nadia had to blink back unexpected tears. She slept, and when she woke, hours later, the fire had burned down to embers and someone was knocking at her door. "Come in," she called, struggling to sit up against the pillows. The door opened, and the Alpha King walked in carrying a tray of food. Nadia stared. Zephyr Stoneheart, the wolf who made other alphas kneel, who ruled the kingdom's largest territory with an iron fist, who had a reputation for ruthlessness that preceded him like a thunderclap, stood in her doorway holding soup and bread like a common servant. The kitchen staff tried to bring this earlier, he said, as if it was perfectly normal. But the healers said you were sleeping too deeply to wake. I told them I'd deliver it myself when you stirred. You're the Alpha King. I'm aware. Don't you have servants for this? He moved into the room with that same predatory grace she'd noticed before, setting the tray on the table by her bed. His eyes swept over her, cataloging, she thought, taking inventory of her condition before settling on her face. I do, he said, but I wanted to check on you myself. The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was ready to address. Zephyr pulled a chair close to the bed, not too close, but near enough to speak without raising his voice, and sat. He didn't touch her. He didn't try to close the distance. He simply waited, his hands folded loosely in his lap, his golden gaze steady on hers. I'm not going to claim you, he said quietly. Whatever the bond wants, whatever my wolf is howling about, I'm not going to force anything you don't freely give. You came here seeking justice, and you'll have it. Everything else can wait. Nadia's throat tightened. Why? Why what? Why are you being kind? The question came out raw, scraped over wounds that hadn't healed. 3 packs turned me away. They didn't even let me finish speaking before they slammed their gates. You've heard the same lies they did. I know you have. I could see it in your guards' faces. And yet you're here, in my room, bringing me food. Zephyr was quiet for a long moment. Because I've seen liars, he said finally. I've stood across from wolves who smiled while they plotted treachery, who spoke honeyed words while their eyes calculated murder. I know what deception looks like. His gaze held hers. And when you walked into my study, half dead from starvation and exposure, you looked me in the eye and demanded justice like it was your right. No one who had something to hide would be that fierce. Something in her chest loosened, a knot she hadn't known she'd been carrying. Tell me, he said, about your brother, about what you saw. And so she did. She told him about Theron's study, the coded correspondence, the hooded figures who smelled wrong. She told him about Caden's death 3 weeks later. Too convenient, too sudden, too perfectly timed. She told him about waking to guards dragging her from her bed, about the accusations that came out of nowhere, about the pack council that had already decided her guilt before she'd spoken a single word in her defense. She told him about the scars on her back, 4 parallel lines carved by her brother's claws when she'd tried to confront him about what she knew. Zephyr listened without interruption. His expression remained carefully neutral, but she could see the tension building in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened each time she described another betrayal. When she finished, the silence stretched between them like a held breath. He sold pack secrets to rogues, Zephyr said slowly. And when you discovered it, he framed you for adultery to ensure no one would believe your testimony. Yes. Your mate died 3 weeks after you found those letters. Nadia's voice came out barely above a whisper. I've thought about that. About whether it was a coincidence. His eyes had gone hard as flint. It wasn't. The confirmation hit her like a blow. Some part of her had suspected, had wondered in the darkest hours of the night, but hearing it spoken aloud made her want to scream. I can't prove it, she managed. Not yet. But the letters, I took some of them before I fled. They're hidden in my cloak lining, coded, but they're in Theron's handwriting. Someone could decipher them. Zephyr rose. For a moment she thought he was going to leave, but instead he crossed to the window and stood with his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. You brought evidence, he said. You walked through a blizzard, pregnant and starving, and you had the presence of mind to bring evidence. I told you, I came here for justice. He turned. The firelight caught the gold still flickering in his eyes, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You'll have it, he said. I swear it on my blood and my bond. Whatever your brother has done, whatever protection he thinks his position gives him, it ends here. In my kingdom, traitors face the crown's justice. He moved toward the door, and Nadia found herself speaking before she could stop herself. Why does it matter to you? He paused with his hand on the latch. Because you're my mate, he said simply. And someone hurt what's mine. He left before she could respond, and Nadia sat in the firelight with his words echoing in her chest and the impossible warmth of the bond pulsing steadily beneath her skin. 3 days passed. Nadia spent them healing, eating, sleeping, letting the fortress's warmth seep into her bones. The healers checked on her twice daily, clucking over her progress and the baby's steady heartbeat. Servants brought meals to her room, and when she felt strong enough to walk the corridors, no one stopped her. She was exploring the library when she heard them. Can't believe he let her stay. The voice drifted from around a corner, sharp with disdain. The Omega whore from Ironhold. My cousin's husband is Beta there, and he says she spread her legs for half the unmated wolves in the pack. I heard it was a mated alpha. Another voice, equally venomous. That she seduced him while his Luna was pregnant. Disgusting. And now our king is housing her like she's someone worth protecting? She should be grateful he didn't throw her back into the snow. Nadia's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her wolf, still restless and unfamiliar after so long dormant, snarled beneath her skin. She should walk away. She should. You are speaking of your future queen. The voice came from behind her, and Nadia turned to find Zephyr emerging from the shadows between 2 towering bookshelves. His eyes blazed gold in the dim light, and the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop 20 degrees as he stalked past her toward the gossiping nobles. They'd gone pale. My king, one of them stammered, a woman in silk and fur, her face frozen in terror. We didn't mean. Apologize on your knees. His voice was ice and iron, carrying the full weight of Alpha Command. Or leave my kingdom without your tongues. They dropped. Both of them, silk gowns pooling on the stone floor, heads bowed so low their foreheads nearly touched the ground. Forgive us, the first one gasped. Please, forgive us, we didn't know. You didn't care to know. Zephyr hadn't raised his voice, but every word cut like a blade. You heard rumors and chose to believe them without question. You spoke poison in my halls about a wolf under my protection. He paused. Get out of my sight. If I hear another word against her from anyone in this fortress, I'll assume it came from your mouths first. They fled. Zephyr turned to her, and the ice in his expression melted into something softer. He moved close, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, and his voice dropped low. No one speaks of my mate that way, he murmured. Ever. Nadia stared up at him, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. His hand came up to rest gently against her lower back, warm and steady, and she felt herself lean into it before she could think to stop herself. I didn't ask you to defend me, she said, but there was no heat in the words. You shouldn't have to ask. He guided her away from the library, down a corridor that led toward her chambers. You're carrying my people's future Luna, and 2 lives that will be precious to this kingdom. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects the crown. You keep saying future Luna. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. We don't have to discuss anything yet. His hand remained steady on her back, a warm anchor. You came here for justice, and you'll have it. The rest. He paused, and for a moment, vulnerability cracked through his alpha facade. The rest will be your choice. Whatever you decide. They'd reached her door. Zephyr stepped back, giving her space, and Nadia found herself looking at him differently than she had 3 days ago. The stories had painted him as ruthless, cold. a creature of violence, but violence in defense of the innocent wasn't cruelty. And cold reserve could hide a heart that felt too much. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing me. You gave me no reason not to." He left her at her door, and Nadia stood in the warmth of her borrowed room and felt, for the first time in 3 moons, something like hope kindling in her chest. The hope lasted precisely 4 days. Nadia had begun to settle into a rhythm at the fortress. Morning meals brought by servants who no longer looked at her with suspicion, afternoons walking the gardens despite the winter cold, evenings spent reading in the library now that the gossiping nobles had been thoroughly cowed. Her body was healing. The blisters had faded, and though the scars on her back still ached when she moved wrong, the healers assured her the tissue was knitting properly. The baby kicked with increasing vigor, pressing against her ribs as if demanding more room. And Zephyr. Zephyr was everywhere and nowhere, a constant presence she felt through the bond even when she couldn't see him. He'd visit her chambers each evening, never staying long, never pushing. They'd talk about the kingdom, about her childhood before everything went wrong, about his years fighting to claim the throne from his father's weak-willed counselors. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words carried weight. No empty platitudes, no false promises, just truth, delivered in that low voice that made her skin prickle with awareness. She was beginning to trust him. That should have warned her that disaster was coming. The summons arrived just after midday, delivered by a young page whose scent carried fear so sharp that Nadia's wolf raised its hackles before she'd even opened the scroll. The words inside turned her blood to ice. Theron Ironhold, ambassador of the Northern Territories, requests formal audience with His Majesty regarding the extradition of Nadia Thornwood to face charges of adultery and treason against her rightful pack. The parchment crumpled in her fist. He was here, her brother, the one who had carved 4 parallel scars into her back, who had sold his own pack's secrets to rogues, who had likely orchestrated her mate's death, was here in this fortress, wearing the mask of a diplomat. The baby kicked, hard, and Nadia pressed her palm against her belly as nausea rolled through her. 3 moons of running. 3 packs that had turned her away because of his lies. And now he'd followed her to the one place she thought might be safe. She found Zephyr in the great hall, surrounded by advisors and guards, his expression carved from stone as he read a scroll identical to hers. When she entered, his eyes snapped to her immediately, and gold bled through the dark brown like sunrise through storm clouds. "You've heard." His voice was flat. "He's here." The words scraped past the tightness in her throat. "Zephyr, he's here. And if he sees me, if he knows, he knows." Zephyr crossed the hall in 3 long strides, his hands coming up to cup her shoulders. The touch steadied her, warmth spreading through the bond like balm on a wound. "He's already claimed diplomatic protection, arriving tomorrow at dawn with a full escort from your former pack." Former pack. The laugh that escaped her was bitter. "They believed his lies. They threw me out while I was carrying my dead mate's child. They're no pack of mine." "Then you have nothing to fear from them." His thumbs traced small circles against her collarbone, and despite everything, she felt her racing heart begin to slow. "He has no power here, Nadia. This is my kingdom. My law. You don't know him." She met his eyes, willing him to understand. "He's charming, persuasive. He made the entire Ironhold Council believe I'd seduced a mated alpha when everyone who knew me knew I'd been devoted to Caden since our bonding. He sells poison wrapped in silk, and by the time you taste it, you're already dying." Something dangerous flickered in Zephyr's gaze. Then perhaps it's time someone fed him his own medicine. The next morning, Nadia watched from a window as the Ironhold delegation rode through the fortress gates. Theron sat at the front of the column, his posture rigid with false dignity, his dark hair slicked back from a face that shared the same bones as hers, but none of the soul. He'd grown a beard since she'd seen him last, since the night he'd cornered her in the corridor and asked if she'd told anyone about the letters. When she'd refused to answer, his claws had answered for him. Her hand drifted to her back, pressing against the scars through her gown. The bond pulsed with Zephyr's rage, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway of her chamber, watching her with eyes that burned gold. I could kill him now. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Before he sets foot in my hall, before he breathes the same air as you. No. The word surprised her, but she meant it. Not yet. If you kill a diplomat without cause, the other packs will turn against you. He knows that. He's counting on it. Then what would you have me do? Nadia turned back to the window, watching as her brother dismounted and handed his reins to a guard. Even from this distance, she could see the way he smiled. Warm, genuine, the perfect picture of a wronged nobleman seeking justice. Let him play his game, she said quietly. Let him think he's winning. And when he exposes himself, we destroy him. The formal audience took place that afternoon in the throne room. Nadia stood beside Zephyr's throne, her position a deliberate statement that made several visiting nobles murmur in surprise. The Alpha King's hand rested on the arm of his chair, but his body was angled toward her, protective, possessive. His scent wrapped around her like a shield, and she clung to it as the doors opened to admit her brother. Theron walked with the confidence of a wolf who'd never been challenged. He wore the formal colors of Ironhold, deep green and silver, and his delegation fanned out behind him like a well-rehearsed honor guard. When his eyes found Nadia, something flickered in their depths. Surprise, quickly masked, then calculation. Your Majesty. He swept into a bow that was just shallow enough to be insulting without being actionable. I thank you for receiving us on such short notice. Ambassador Ironhold. Zephyr's voice carried no warmth. You've traveled far to petition for the extradition of a wolf under my protection. I admit to curiosity about your reasoning. My reasoning is simple, Majesty. Theron straightened, his expression shifting to one of pained nobility. My sister. He gestured toward Nadia with the precise amount of wounded grief. Has committed grave crimes against our pack. Adultery. Betrayal of her mating bond. And when she was called to answer for these crimes, she fled like a coward, bringing shame upon our family name. Strange. Zephyr's fingers drummed once against the arm of his throne. The version I heard was quite different. I'm certain it was. Theron's smile was sympathetic. Nadia has always been troubled. Our parents' deaths affected her deeply. The healers believed she might recover with time, but when she took a mate, her instability only worsened. She began making wild accusations, seeing conspiracies where there were none. He shook his head sadly. When her mate died, she snapped entirely. Created elaborate stories about treachery and betrayal, accused me, her own brother, of unthinkable crimes. Nadia's nails bit into her palms. He was so convincing, so perfectly reasonable. She could see the doubt flickering across the faces of the assembled nobles, could see them wondering if perhaps the disgraced Omega had invented her persecution. These are serious allegations, one of Zephyr's advisors said. But with respect, Ambassador, they require more than your word to substantiate. Of course. Theron produced a scroll from his sleeve with the practiced ease of a magician revealing a trick. I've brought sworn testimony from 3 members of the Ironhold Council who witnessed Nadia's episodes, as well as the account of the Alpha whose mate she seduced, detailing the affair in explicit terms. The scroll passed from hand to hand, and Nadia watched as brows furrowed and lips pressed thin. More poison, wrapped in official seals and elegant script. More lies that would become truth if she didn't stop them. This testimony is compelling, the advisor admitted. It's fabricated. Nadia's voice rang out clear and cold, and every eye in the hall turned to her. Every word of it. Theron's expression shifted to pained disappointment. Sister, please. This is exactly what I was warning His Majesty about. These delusions. Are you calling me delusional, brother? She stepped forward, and she felt Zephyr tense behind her, ready to intervene. But she didn't need intervention. Not for this. The same way you called me a whore when I refused to stay silent about your meetings with the hooded strangers? The same way you called me unstable when I found the coded letters in your study? Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Theron's mask flickered, just for an instant, before he restored it. What letters? His voice dripped with concern. Nadia, there are no letters. This is exactly the kind of fantasy. The letters you wrote in the trading cipher our father taught us. She was walking toward him now, each step deliberate, her wolf pressing against her skin with unfamiliar strength. The ones you exchanged with rogues in the Eastern Territories, the ones that detailed patrol routes and supply shipments and the precise timing of Caden's scouting mission, the mission where he was ambushed and killed. The hall had gone silent. Theron's composure cracked, just slightly. You have no proof of any of this, don't I? The question hung in the air between them, and Nadia watched her brother's face with grim satisfaction as uncertainty crept into his eyes. He didn't know. He'd searched her belongings after she fled. She was certain of it. But he didn't know she'd hidden the letters in her cloak lining. Didn't know she'd kept the proof of his treason close to her heart through 3 pack rejections and a mountain blizzard, and 2 days of walking through hell. Let him wonder. Let him worry. I think, Zephyr said, rising from his throne with predatory grace, that this matter requires more thorough investigation before any decisions are made. Ambassador Ironhold, you and your delegation will be housed in the East Wing. You will not approach the Lady Nadia without my explicit permission, and you will submit to questioning by my truth speakers within the week. Theron's jaw tightened. Your Majesty, surely. This is not a negotiation. Gold blazed in Zephyr's eyes. You came to my kingdom making accusations against my... He paused, and Nadia felt the bond pulse with possessive heat. Against a wolf under my protection. You will prove those accusations or you will leave empty-handed. Those are your only options. The dismissal was absolute. Theron bowed, deeper this time, though fury simmered beneath his practiced calm, and led his delegation from the hall. When the doors closed behind him, Nadia released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That night, Zephyr came to her chambers earlier than usual. He brought no food this time, no pretense of a formal visit. He simply appeared in her doorway, his shoulders tight with tension, and asked quietly, "May I come in?" She stepped aside to let him pass. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. Nadia settled into one of the chairs near the warmth, and after a moment's hesitation, Zephyr took the other. The silence between them felt different now, charged with everything that had happened in the throne room, everything that remained unspoken. The letters, he said finally. You have them? Hidden in my cloak. She nodded toward the wardrobe where the tattered garment hung, cleaned but not discarded. I took them the night I confronted him. I knew no one would believe me without proof, and I knew he'd destroy them the moment he realized they were missing. You've been carrying evidence of treason for 3 moons. His voice held something like wonder. Through everything. The pack rejections, the blizzard, the mountain. It was all I had. Her hand found her belly, pressing against the curve where her child, Caden's child, grew stronger each day. That and this. The only things left of the life I was supposed to have. Zephyr leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes searching her face. In the firelight, the scar through his eyebrow stood out starkly, a reminder that he too had survived violence, that he too had fought for what he held. When I took the throne, he said slowly, I was 17 winters. My father had been weak, indecisive. The counselors had grown fat on his complacency, carving the kingdom into personal fiefdoms. 3 of them tried to have me killed in the first moon. A ghost of a smile crossed his severe features. I killed them instead. The 3 challengers. She remembered the rumors, how they'd reached even the distant Ironhold territory. They said you were brutal, merciless. I was. No apology in his voice. I had to be. This kingdom was dying from the inside, and the only cure was to cut out the rot before it spread further. He paused. I've been called ruthless so often I stopped arguing the point. But there's a difference between ruthlessness and cruelty. Ruthlessness is doing what must be done regardless of cost. Cruelty is enjoying the suffering of others. And which are you? His eyes met hers, and in their depths she saw something raw, vulnerable. I don't know anymore. I've been the ruthless king for so long that I forgot there might be anything else. The words settled into the space between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Nadia found herself rising from her chair, moving toward him without conscious decision. The bond pulled at her, warm and insistent, and she let it guide her until she stood before him, close enough to touch. The night you found me in the snow, she said softly, you could have turned me away. Every practical consideration said you should. A pregnant Omega with accusations of adultery, no proof of her claims, nothing to offer the crown. You took me in anyway. The bond told you I was your mate. It didn't force you to be kind. She reached out, hesitating for just a moment before her fingers brushed his jaw. He went utterly still beneath her touch, barely breathing. You brought me food yourself rather than sending servants. You listened to my story without judgment. You defended me against nobles who had every reason to believe the worst. They had no reason. His voice had gone rough. They had rumors and spite. That's not reason. Most would call it enough. Her thumb traced the line of his cheekbone, marveling at the contrast between the hardness of his reputation and the way he trembled under her hand. You're not the monster they say you are, Zephyr Stoneheart. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm flat against his face. His eyes had shifted to pure gold, the wolf so close to the surface she could almost see it looking out at her. And you're not the broken thing your brother tried to make you. His voice was barely a whisper. You're the bravest wolf I've ever met, and I will tear the world apart before I let him hurt you again. The declaration should have frightened her. 3 moons ago, it would have. But standing here with his warmth seeping into her palm and his wolf gazing at her with desperate devotion, Nadia felt only the solid certainty of the bond, and beneath it, something more. Something that wasn't fate or instinct, but choice. She was choosing this, choosing him. Before she could speak, a pounding at the door shattered the moment. Your Majesty! A guard's voice, sharp with alarm. The East Wing, there's been an incident. Ambassador Ironhold is demanding an audience. He claims the Lady Nadia has stolen classified documents and is demanding her immediate arrest. Zephyr was on his feet in an instant, his hand finding Nadia's and holding fast. He's making his move, she breathed. Then we make ours. His eyes blazed gold in the firelight. Get the letters. Whatever happens next, we end this tonight. Nadia's hands moved with steady purpose as she crossed to the wardrobe and retrieved her tattered cloak. The fabric had been cleaned by Zephyr's servants, but they'd left it otherwise untouched, including the hidden pocket sewn into the lining where she'd concealed the letters 3 moons ago. Her fingers found the slight thickness of folded parchment, and she drew the documents free with a sharp exhale of relief. I have them, she said, turning to show Zephyr the coded correspondence. Everything he wrote, every patrol route he sold, every shipment he betrayed, it's all here. Zephyr's eyes flashed gold as he looked at the letters, then at her face. Then we go now, before he has time to plan anything else. They moved through the fortress corridors together, Zephyr's hand warm against her lower back, his presence a wall of protective heat at her side. Guards fell into step behind them, 4, then 6, then 8, responding to some unspoken command that rippled through the pack bonds. Nadia clutched the letters against her chest and felt her wolf pressing forward, no longer dormant, no longer silent. The great hall blazed with torchlight when they arrived. What had been an empty throne room hours ago now teemed with bodies, counselors roused from their beds, nobles in hastily donned finery, warriors standing at attention along the walls. And at the center of it all, flanked by his own guards, stood Theron. Her brother looked nothing like the composed ambassador who'd arrived at dawn. His diplomatic mask had cracked, revealing the cold fury beneath. When his eyes found Nadia, something ugly twisted his features. "There she is." His voice rang through the hall, pitched to Carrie. "The thief. The traitor. She broke into my chambers and stole documents belonging to the Ironhold pack. I stole nothing." Nadia stepped forward, and the hall fell silent. "These letters were written in our father's trading cipher, Theron. A cipher you taught me yourself when we were children. I took them from your study 3 weeks before my mate was murdered, the same mate whose patrol route you sold to rogues." Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Theron's jaw tightened. "Lies," he spat. "The desperate fabrications of a disgraced Omega trying to save herself. Your Majesty, surely you see what she's doing. She's manipulating you, using the bond to... Choose your next words carefully." Zephyr's voice cut through the hall like a blade, low and lethal. "You're speaking about my mate." The word landed like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed off the stone walls. Counselors exchanged shocked glances, and Theron went pale. "Your mate." He recovered quickly, his diplomatic training reasserting itself even as his eyes darted toward the exits. "How convenient. A pregnant Omega appears at your gates with wild accusations, and suddenly she's your fated mate. This is clearly a scheme to... I didn't come here looking for a mate." Nadia's voice rang clear, stronger than she'd ever heard it. "I came here looking for justice. The bond between us changes nothing about the truth of what you did, brother." She held up the letters, letting the firelight catch the familiar handwriting. "These are written in the cipher our father taught us both. A cipher known only to the Ironhold bloodline. They detail patrol schedules for Ironhold territory, supply routes, the timing of scouting missions. And this one..." She separated a single page from the stack, her hand trembling only slightly. "This one contains a payment record. 500 gold pieces, received 3 days after Caden's patrol was ambushed. 3 days after the rogues knew exactly where he would be and exactly how many warriors would be with him." The hall had gone deathly quiet. "You sold my mate to his killers." Nadia's voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "You took payment for his death. And when I found your letters, when you realized I knew what you'd done, you accused me of adultery to silence me. You had me dragged before the Pack Council. You carved these scars into my back when I tried to confront you." She turned, pulling aside the collar of her gown to reveal the 4 parallel lines that marked her skin. "Your claws, your cruelty, your treason." Theron's composure shattered. "You stupid meddling..." He lunged forward, shoving past his own guards, his hand shifting into claws as he charged toward Nadia. "You should have died in the mountains. You should have..." Heat pulsed beneath Nadia's skin, and something she hadn't known existed roared to life in her chest. Silver light blazed from her eyes. The force of it stopped Theron in his tracks, slamming into him like a physical wall. He staggered back, his face twisting in shock and sudden fear, as Nadia felt power she'd never known she possessed flooding through her veins. Her wolf wasn't just awake anymore. It was blazing, burning, singing with a strength that felt ancient and absolute. "The Luna blessing," someone whispered in the crowd. Moon goddess preserve us. She carries the Luna blessing. Nadia didn't understand what was happening to her. She only knew that when she spoke, her voice resonated with authority that seemed to shake the very stones beneath her feet. I am Nadia Thornwood. The silver light pulsed brighter, truth marks glowing across her skin like moonlight made visible. Mate of the fallen warrior Caden, who died protecting me from the rogues you sent. Mate of Zephyr Stoneheart, Alpha King of this realm. And I carry within me the evidence of every crime you committed. She stepped forward, and Theron scrambled backward, his bravado completely gone. Deny it, deny any of it, while the moon goddess herself marks my words as truth. The hall held its breath. Theron's eyes darted wildly, to his guards, to the exits, to the letters still clutched in Nadia's glowing hands. Calculation flickered across his features, the desperate mathematics of a wolf who knew he was cornered. Then his expression hardened into something vicious. Fine. He spat the word like poison. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I sold the patrol routes. Yes, I took their gold. This kingdom is dying, rotting from within, and I wasn't going to let it drag me down with it. The rogues offered power, real power, the kind that doesn't depend on bonds or bloodlines or sentimental garbage about loyalty. His lip curled as he looked at Nadia. Caden was a fool. He was always a fool, sniffing around you like you were something special instead of just another Omega breeder. When the rogues asked for a target to prove my commitment, I gave them exactly what they wanted. The confession hung in the air, damning and absolute. He was my mate. Nadia's voice shook with grief and fury. He was your pack brother, and you sold him like livestock. He was in my way. Theron's voice had gone cold, all pretense of humanity stripped away. Just like you are. Just like... He moved faster than she'd expected. A desperate lunge that carried him toward her with claws extended and murder in his eyes. Nadia's hands flew up instinctively, silver light blazing. But Zephyr was faster. The Alpha King intercepted Theron mid-leap, his own shift beginning as he slammed his sister's killer to the stone floor. The impact shook the hall. Zephyr's claws pinned Theron's shoulders, his weight holding the other wolf immobile as gold blazed in his eyes. You sold your pack to rogues. Zephyr's voice was barely human, the growl of his wolf bleeding through every syllable. You hunted your pregnant sister across 4 territories. You murdered her mate for gold. Theron writhed beneath him, still fighting even though his cause was lost. She's nothing, an Omega, a worthless... Nadia stepped forward, her silver light dimming but not disappearing entirely. She looked down at the brother she'd once loved, the boy who'd taught her to read and showed her how to track deer through winter forests, and felt nothing but cold certainty. I am not nothing. Her voice rang through the hall, steady and sure. I am the witness to your treason. I am the mate of the wolf you wronged, and I am done running from you, Theron Ironhold. She looked at Zephyr, meeting those blazing gold eyes, and nodded once. It was all the permission he needed. Zephyr's claws tore through Theron's throat in a single savage motion. Blood sprayed across the stone floor, hot and dark, and Theron's body convulsed once before going still. The light faded from his eyes, those cold gray eyes that had watched her suffer, that had calculated her death like a merchant counting coins. And Nadia felt something inside her finally release. The Crown's justice, Zephyr announced to the silent hall, rising from her brother's body with blood on his hands, is served. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, slowly, the assembled wolves began to kneel. One by one, then in clusters, then all at once. Counselors and nobles and warriors alike dropping to their knees before their king, and the silver-lit Omega standing at his side. The Ironhold guards knelt too, their loyalty shifting in the face of undeniable truth. Nadia swayed on her feet, exhaustion crashing through her as the Luna power faded. Zephyr caught her before she could fall, gathering her against his chest with impossible gentleness despite the violence still lingering in his posture. "I have you," he murmured against her hair. "It's over. He can never hurt you again." She pressed her face into his throat, breathing in pine and wood smoke and safety, and let herself believe it. The hours that followed blurred together in Nadia's memory. Servants cleaned the great hall. Counselors documented her evidence, comparing her letters to known Ironhold communications and confirming their authenticity beyond any doubt. Healers checked her and the baby, pronouncing both healthy despite the night's exertions. Messages were sent to the 3 packs that had turned her away, official correspondence bearing the royal seal and the truth of what had transpired. Through all of it, Zephyr never left her side. It was past midnight when they finally returned to her chambers. Their chambers now, though neither had spoken the words aloud. The fire had been built high against the mountain cold, and clean clothes laid out for both of them. Nadia stood by the window, watching snow fall through the darkness, and felt the bond humming between them like a living thing. "The Luna blessing," she said quietly, when the silence had stretched long enough. "I didn't know I had it." "Neither did I." Zephyr moved to stand behind her, close but not quite touching. "It's rare. A gift from the moon goddess herself, awakened only when a wolf of true character faces impossible odds." His breath stirred her hair. "You faced your brother's treason with nothing but truth and courage. The goddess saw your heart and found it worthy." Nadia turned to face him. In the firelight, his severe features seemed softer somehow. The scar through his eyebrow a reminder of battles survived, his eyes shifting between dark brown and warm gold as his wolf pressed close to the surface. "When you first saw me," she said, "in the study, when the bond, I thought I was dreaming." His voice had gone rough. "Or hallucinating. I'd given up on ever finding a mate, convinced myself I didn't need one, that the kingdom was enough, that I was meant to rule alone." His hand rose, hovering near her face but not quite touching, as if he feared she might disappear. "And then you walked in, half-frozen, starving, pregnant with another wolf's child, and looked at me like you were ready to fight the world if I tried to turn you away, and everything I thought I knew about myself became meaningless." Nadia closed the distance between them, pressing her palm to his chest. Beneath her fingers, his heart pounded in a rhythm that matched her own. "I wasn't ready," she admitted. "When I felt the bond, Caden's death was still so fresh. I thought feeling anything for someone else would be a betrayal of what we had." She looked up at him, letting him see the truth in her eyes. "But you showed me something different. You showed me that I could honor his memory and still open my heart again. That loving him didn't mean I couldn't choose you." Zephyr's breath caught. "Choose me?" "Yes." She rose on her toes, bringing her face closer to his. "I choose you, Zephyr Stoneheart. Not because of fate or destiny or bonds beyond my control. Because you're the wolf who brought me food when I was starving, who listened without judgment, who defended me against everyone who believed the worst." Her free hand found his jaw, tracing the hard line of bone. "I choose the king who was ruthless enough to take his throne at 17 and gentle enough to kneel beside a pregnant Omega's bed." Something cracked open in his expression. Wonder, joy, vulnerability he'd hidden for so long he'd almost forgotten it existed. Nadia. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "My Nadia." "Yours," she agreed. "If you'll have me." His answer was to cup her face in both hands and kiss her. The bond roared to life between them, no longer dormant, no longer restrained. Warmth flooded her veins, heat pooling in her chest and spreading through every limb. His mouth moved against hers with desperate tenderness, claiming and worshipping at once, and she felt the truth of his feelings pouring through the connection, fierce protectiveness, aching loneliness, joy so sharp it bordered on pain. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes had gone completely gold. "The marking," he said, his voice rough with need. Nadia, I need you to be certain. Once we're bonded, there's no going back. You'll be my Luna, my queen. Everything I am will belong to you. And everything I am will belong to you." She tilted her head, baring the junction of her neck and shoulder, the place where claiming bites were given. "I've never been more certain of anything." He groaned low in his throat, the sound rumbling through both their chests. "Tell me to stop and I will." His lips grazed her throat, his breath hot against her skin. "Tell me this isn't what you want and I'll wait. I'll wait forever if I have to." "I don't want you to wait." She pulled him closer, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. "I want you to make me yours." His teeth sank into the junction of her neck and shoulder. Pain bloomed first, sharp, brilliant, searing. Nadia gasped, her hands clutching at his shoulders, as the marking bite burned through her like fire. But beneath the pain, something else surged. Pleasure, deep and primal, rolling through her in waves that stole her breath. The bond expanded, stretching, growing, becoming something vast and permanent and utterly unbreakable. Through it, she felt him. Not just his presence anymore, but the essence of who he was, his memories, his fears, his hopes. She felt the 17-year-old who'd taken a crown soaked in blood, the king who'd learned to be hard because softness meant death. The man who'd looked at her across his study and felt his entire world reshape itself around a single impossible truth. "Mine," his wolf growled through the bond. "Mate. Mine." Nadia's wolf answered with a surge of possessive heat that surprised them both. When Zephyr released her throat, she didn't hesitate. Her hands pulled him down, her own mouth finding the corded muscle of his neck, and she bit. He shuddered beneath her, a raw sound tearing from his chest, part groan, part howl, utterly undone. Her teeth broke skin, and she tasted copper and salt and something that hummed with power on her tongue. Through the bond, she felt his shock, his ecstasy, his fierce wild joy at being claimed in return. "Yours," she sent through the connection. "Mine. Mate. Forever," he answered. "Yours forever." When she released him, they stood trembling in each other's arms. Blood marked both their throats, his on her shoulder, hers on his neck, evidence of a claiming that went both ways. The bond between them had settled into something golden and warm, a constant presence in the back of her mind that felt less like a chain than a homecoming. "My Luna," Zephyr murmured against her hair, his voice wrecked and wondering. "My king," she answered. They held each other as the fire crackled and snow fell beyond the windows, as the bond thrummed steady between them, and Nadia felt for the first time in 3 moons, completely and utterly safe. 1 moon later, Nadia stood at the altar of the great hall in a gown of midnight blue and silver, Zephyr's hand steady in hers, as the assembled Pax watched their Luna Queen be crowned. The ceremony had been simple at her request. No elaborate rituals, no ostentatious displays. Just the formal words, the silver circlet settled onto her brow, and the thunderous approval of hundreds of wolves recognizing their new queen. Her belly had grown larger in the weeks since Theron's death, the twins within her making themselves known with increasingly vigorous kicks. The healers had confirmed what Nadia had somehow already known. 1 child carried the spark of Caden's spirit, a piece of her first mate living on despite his death. The other, newly conceived in the days following the marking, belonged to Zephyr. Both would be princes of the realm. Both would be loved beyond measure. The Pax who had turned her away sent tributes: gold, silks, precious herbs, formal letters of apology sealed with shame-faced sigils. Nadia accepted them graciously as befitted a queen, though privately she found satisfaction in the knowledge that her survival had proven every one of their judgments wrong. She was not a whore. She was not a disgrace. She was Luna Queen of the realm's largest territory, mate to the Alpha King, carrier of royal heirs. Let them remember that, the next time a desperate wolf came to their gates seeking sanctuary. That evening, after the ceremonies and celebrations had finally wound down, Zephyr found her in their chambers. She stood by the window again. She'd grown to love watching the snow fall, the peace of it, the reminder that she no longer had to walk through storms alone. My queen. His arms wrapped around her from behind, hands settling gently over the swell of her belly. How are you feeling? Tired. She leaned back against his chest, letting his warmth soak into her. Happy. Still slightly disbelieving that any of this is real. I know the feeling. His lips brushed the mating mark on her throat, the scar that would never fully fade, a permanent brand of their bond. Through their connection, she felt his contentment, his protective love, his wonder at the life they were building together. The delegates from Ironhold departed this morning, he said quietly. The new Alpha sent assurances of loyalty and cooperation. Good. Nadia didn't ask who had taken Theron's place. She didn't need to know. That chapter of her life was closed, written in blood and justice, and she had no intention of looking back. There's one more thing. Zephyr's hand found hers, guiding it to the windowsill where something glinted in the firelight. A small carved wolf, wooden and slightly crude, obviously made by inexpert hands. I found it in the nursery supplies. Apparently I made it when I was 7 winters old, convinced that I'd give it to my future mate someday. Nadia laughed, lifting the little carving to examine it more closely. The wolf had crooked ears and a tail that listed to one side, but there was something earnest and hopeful in its crude lines. It's perfect, she said. It's terrible. But he was smiling, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. I thought about having a proper one commissioned, but then I realized I didn't want to give you something made by someone else, even if this one is objectively awful. She turned in his arms, cupping his face in her hands. I love it. And I love you. The words still felt new, still carried the weight of revelation. But Zephyr's eyes went soft with emotion, and she felt the echo of her declaration resonating through their bond. I love you, he answered. My Luna, my queen, my home. Outside the window, snow continued to fall over the mountain fortress. Inside, warm and safe and utterly whole, Nadia Thornwood, Luna Queen of the Stoneheart realm, survivor of impossible odds, beloved mate of the Alpha King, smiled and let herself believe in happy endings. Peace had come at last.